Hi, this is Sarah Hale with SVI Media here with Paul Stauffer. We're going to talk a little bit about pharmacy in Star Valley. Paul, why don't you tell us about your recent project and a little bit about what you've learned and how you ended up doing your project?
Well, I started this project kind of as a test to see how I do my own personal history. Wanted to learn how to use the media and things like that. And Ed Lasota kind of encouraged me, and it's turned out to be a real fun project. I've actually, we moved here in 1948, and my dad was a pharmacist and started his own store here. And so I've actually lived about 61 years of pharmacy, being in a drugstore, either as a child or as an employee, as a soda jerk. Eventually went away to college and came back and operated the store for 40 years.
So then when you retired, you couldn't get the pharmacy bug out of your blood, or you were looking, you had a big chunk of Star Valley pharmacy history. You thought, I'm going to put a project together?
Sure, yeah, that was it. I didn't think it would be any kind of bestseller. I knew that very limited people might be interested in this, but it was interesting to me. And it turned out there's some really fun stories that I learned, going clear back to the early 1900s, fun things that happened to pharmacists and stuff.
So what's the name of your book?
The name of the book is Pharmacists and Pharmacies of Star Valley, 1891 to 2015.
So why don't you tell me about the first pharmacist that was here? What did you find fascinating about, at that point, 1891, that's, pharmacies and infancy sort of a thing at that point. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you learned?
Well, I have a good question about 1891. There weren't very many people in the valley then, maybe 50 families, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the Logan newspaper, there wasn't a newspaper in Star Valley at that time. But Orville Harrison put me on this Logan newspaper report that said that there was the saloons had taken a root in Afton, and their close kin, the pharmacy, and between the two of them they were cooking up these decoctions that were popular at some of the dances. And,
well, that would
that's
be an
the first
interesting
one.
mix.
We don't know who that pharmacist was, if indeed he was a pharmacist. He might have just. I have found in some of my research that some of the people that said they were pharmacists, or that people thought they were pharmacists at least, were not. And so the first guy that I can tell you who he was a Dr. Leroy Pugmire. And he is a grandson of Charles C. Rich, who is an important settler in the Bear Lake Valley, and probably a lot of people in Star Valley, the Riches, are all descended from him.
There you go. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about some of the interesting stories? You said it was fascinating, some interesting things you found out. What were some of the things that you were most surprised by, or some of the things that you found, most interesting in your research?
Well, this Dr. Pugmire, this guy, Leroy Pugmire, was a doctor, actually, and he was practicing here at the same time Dr. West was.
Mm-hmm.
And but he could see a need for a pharmacy, and so he built and outfitted a drugstore. But about a year later, he wanted to go on and get some more research done, and so he asks his younger brother, who is not a pharmacist, has never had any kind of experience in medicine. His name was Charles Colson Rich Pugmire, and he talks him into coming back here, and he spends some late nights studying the literature. He was not registered, and he writes in his journal that he says, I don't think anybody in Star Valley knew that I was not a pharmacist.
Do a little late night homework and
That's
open
right.
a shop?
Except that Dr. West found out, figured it out, and Dr. West was ready to close the business down when the Dr. Pugmire, the brother that had left and gone back east for more education, sent a Dr. Vermillion out here for his health, and he stopped on his way in Cheyenne and became a registered pharmacist. And he was there at the store when they showed up to close the store, and of course they couldn't because he was a pharmacist. And a year later, this C. Charles Colson Rich Pugmire sold his store at a profit to Dr. West and to E.A. Gardner. The two of them bought it.
Well, tell me a little bit
So that
about,
was fun.
kind of interesting that you have the right person at the right spot as far as keeping a pharmacy open. Tell me a little bit about, how has pharmacy changed? What did you find? How has it changed or I guess modified itself over the years?
Well, in the early days, they mixed a lot of their medications up, and I have in my book I have photographs of some of the early prescriptions going back to at least 1916,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting to look at those and see what the doctors were prescribing. If there was not a pharmacist at the drugstore, then the doctors would go to the drugstore and fill their own prescriptions. And this happened quite a bit in the early days. So that's changed quite a bit. Now,
So if the pharmacist was out with his family or out of town or whatever and they needed something, they could go in and mix what was needed?
or the doctor could.
Nice.
Or the doctor, in a lot of cases, there was not a pharmacist.
Mm-hmm.
The store was open in business as a drugstore for years. During World War II, for example, Afton Thrifty Drug, there was not a pharmacist there for 3 years during World War II. Gillette Call and the Rexall Drug had to do all of the pharmacy business, and poor Gillette would have probably cashed in. His heart was bad. If his son Tracy hadn't have got registered and gone to work there as a pharmacist for a while. Tracy's younger brother Harold he had started pharmacy school, but he joined the Air Force, and he was in World War II and was actually forced down in a Liberator bomber and spent some of his time in World War II in Sweden. Eventually he got out and came back and finished his education and became a pharmacist.
So what were some of the challenges of running a pharmacy in a pioneer town in a place that transportation was iffy, weather was iffy, illnesses were, what were some of the challenges?
Well, some of them were, of course, just the economy of the valley. You couldn't get a pharmacist in some cases, and so the doctors, rather than wanting to go there and fill their own prescriptions all the time, actually located their office in the drugstore. This happened when E.A. Gardner got the drugstore. It's called E.A. Gardner's Drugstore, but E.A. Gardner was not a pharmacist.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dr. West would have been the one and that's why Dr. West bought into it. And then later there was a Dr. Groom that located here, and he had the same problem. There wasn't a pharmacist, so he bought E.A. Gardner's drugstore and ran it and had his office there also. And one of the problems he had was, he claims, was he said that he says this is a pretty wild town. He said every other building was a bar. That it really isn't true. There were some bars, of course. And the other thing he wrote is that when he would do his house calls in the wintertime on a sleigh at night, he always packed a 30-30 along with him because he said there were wolves that were a problem. And that's the only instance I've ever found of wolves being a problem, except the livestock in Star Valley. So,
okay,
kind of interesting stories.
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about the prescriptions themselves? What were people using in 1891 as opposed to what they're using now? Like how was the demand or the content of what was in the drugstore changed?
Well, there were some medicines that they used back then that we use even now. We knew about opium, heroin, all those kind of things. Paregoric, those were in some of the concoctions. A lot of things were. A lot of the people in Star Valley made up their own, like sulfur in rendered lard and stuff to put on your skin.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't. Aspirin was invented early on. But a lot of the things the pharmacists had to mix up, and they were kind of complicated deals, some of them.
So, you know, what were some of the ailments people were facing? Like, what would they come to the pharmacy for?
Well, same thing they do now. But there would be a lot, you know, constipation and things like that. There's a lot of people had problems with all those kind of things. There's one, if you want to know, I think I might have it here. One of the concoctions they had. Let's see, this one is in 1916. Okay. There was a mixture of these were powders that were put together. A mixture of ipecacuanha powder, opium in powder, and potassium sulfate, and they mixed that together with some other bismuth, a bismuth salt, and would have been a very powerful form of Pepto-Bismol.
Yeah.
And you took the powders would be put up in a powder paper, so the pharmacist had to neatly measure out these powders, and then neatly fold them in a powder paper. Then the patient would open the powder paper and dump it in some water or other liquid and drink it.
Well, that would certainly take care of a few things, I think.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about why you decided to put this book together, and what you sort of felt was what did you accomplish? What made it worth your time?
Well, what made it worth my time, I'll start with that, was it just got kind of fun after a while. Reading some of the stories and telling some of the stories. There were some funny things that happened in it, like in any business, I suppose. Why I put it together? I just thought that that's something that needed to be written down somewhere, at least in my own personal history, and turns out that other people have been interested in it, so we'll see how it goes.
So from here, where do you go? What do you do next? You talked a little bit about working on your personal history. What are your next projects?
Yes. Well, right now I'm working on my personal history. I have a lot of photographs. My dad gave me a camera when I was in elementary school, and there are some photographs actually in the pharmacy book that I took with that camera. But when I finish that project, then my next project is going to write a history of fishing in Star Valley. Not just fly fishing. This would be everything I can find, from when they were netting whitefish down here on around Etna. I don't know whether it was to reduce the population of whitefish or whether people just wanted to eat them, but it was legal. Game and Fish helped, and it was interesting. Of course, I have lived a lot of that too in Star Valley, the history of fishing. But there's a lot that happened early that I need to find out about.
So you grew up in a pharmacy household. You went away to pharmacy school. You came back, were a pharmacist in the community for a number of years. What is it about pharmacy that you love, and would you do it all again? Knowing now what you know, would you be a pharmacist again in Star Valley? Why or why not?
Well, I'm really glad that I was a pharmacist when I was a pharmacist. I think the joy of it was working with people and helping people. There probably wasn't a Sunday, we were closed on Sundays, but there probably was hardly a Sunday that I didn't go down and help somebody. One time I remember getting a call from a lady that said her little baby, an infant, had lost its pacifier, and it had to have the brand that we had at our drugstore, because I mentioned, well, you know, there's convenience stores open, they might have one. No, this baby is crying and crying. I've got to have some help, and that's the only pacifier that works. Okay, so I went down and opened up the drugstore, sold a $1 pacifier. The next morning, that lady came in. That little kid had a booming earache, was why he was crying.
Oh.
And anyway, she came in with several prescriptions to fill for it, the poor little guy, and so, you know, I felt I did the best I could.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, service to the public was probably the thing that was most rewarding. Would I do it again now? I quite enjoyed being my own boss, or working with a couple other guys, partners that were my partners. I don't know whether I would like to be a pharmacist for a corporation or not now, if I were to start over again. They get paid very well, probably better than we ever did, but I kind of liked being my own boss.
What advice do you have for people now in Star Valley that as they go forward as far as history is concerned? What is it about? I mean, you took one particular piece of Star Valley history, you wrote a book about it, you're making a presentation to the Historical Society about it. Why is preserving pieces of Star Valley's history so important?
Oh, we need to know where we're coming from, and it's interesting. I visited with the lady down here at Dog-Eared Books, Mrs. Wade, and she says that a lot of she has one whole section of books that are written by Star Valley people about Star Valley, some of the different communities, the different things, and she keeps a section there because a lot of people who move into Star Valley want to find out about the valley and the people and the culture here. And so she says those are her biggest customers, people that settle at Star Valley Ranch or somewhere else and come in and want to find out about the people that they are now living with. I think it's important. There are a number of things that we could probably learn more about in the valley.
Absolutely. There's just something about being from Star Valley.
Yeah. And Orville Harrison has written a good book. I just finished reading it on the history of Star Valley, and it's quite comprehensive, but he can't begin to cover. I mean, he has one page there about the pharmacies, and it's very briefly covered. That would be true of a lot of the different aspects of the valley.
So what do you have for as far as advice for people who have a story to tell? Would you tell them to get started, or how do they go about it?
Yeah, well, there's an interesting website that they can go to. It's called the Wyoming Newspaper Project, and some group has taken the time to actually index a number of all of the newspapers throughout the state that they could find up until about the year 1922, I think it is, somewhere in the early 1920s. And so you can put in a word like drugstore or drug or something like that, and it'll pull you there to the article that has that word in it. And so that was a nice way of finding out some of the things I did. Unfortunately, not all of the issues, for example, of the Star Valley Independent are available that early.
Mm-hmm.
There are some, and that's where I got some of my information, at least where I could go and try to contact the families of these pharmacists and find out more about them. So that's a place to start. I think the Star Valley Independent, even later on, I spent quite a bit of time at the Microfiche up here at the Genealogy Library, Family History Library. They have all of the issues of the Independent on microfilm, and you can spend a lot of time.
There's a lot of history there.
There's a lot of history there. Realize that, of course, that history is seen through an editor's or a writer's view. You really need to, at that point, you need to find out who the person was, who's more about it, and see if you can't branch out and get some more data right from the very start. But that's a good place to start.
Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about where we can find this book that you've put together, and again, just remind us what it is we're looking for. What's the title of your book, and where do you find it?
Well, the book I've donated a copy to the local library, the Afton, I guess it's a Lincoln County Library.
The Star Valley Branch
Star Valley
Library,
Branch Library has a copy. There's also a copy to the Historical Society. And there's a copy to the Family History Library
Mm-hmm.
up here by the Tabernacle. And I have I'll have some copies available when I give this presentation to the Star Valley Historical Society. I'll have them available there. They're $20 each. I tried. I'm not making hardly any money off of it. It's just I need that to recuperate some of my costs. But and so this is not a venture to make money. This is a venture to have fun and to keep myself busy during the winter when the fishing isn't so good.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.